Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Wacky Wheels for DOS. This is a kart racing game developed by Beavis Soft and published by Apogee back in 1994. And it's fairly interesting. You play as a variety of zoo animals who have escaped and are riding what are described as lawnmowers, but they're really just go-karts. And it's very clearly inspired by the likes of Mario Kart, specifically Super Mario Kart, which was released in 1992. And so you have this very strange mishmash of characters where you're finding things like sharks riding go-karts, just driving around on tracks and with power-ups and all sorts of things. It's certainly very silly, hence the name Wacky Wheels. And there was a bit of controversy between the developers of this game and another company by the name of Copysoft. Some of you might know that name as the developers of the Scunny series, where they had this squirrel that was their main character. At any rate, they released a game called Scunny Kart, and supposedly they had been shown Wacky Wheels before Scunny Kart ever came out. And there was some controversy between the two developers as to whether or not Copysoft actually took some of the game code from Wacky Wheels and used it in Scunny Kart, but nothing ever really came of that. But the real question here is, how is Wacky Wheels? Does it stand the test of time? Well, as far as the presentation goes, it's certainly a product of its era. It was the early 90s, and pretty much everything was sprite-based. You had the occasional polygon-based 3D game, but it looked pretty terrible. And 3D didn't really take off until later, so you had this kind of faux 3D look. And it works fairly well in this game for the most part, although some things are a bit undetailed, and the sprite work here and there is a bit messy. That said, they go for this bright, cartoony art style that actually works really, really well, despite the animations being very low in the frame count and not being particularly smooth or impressive by any stretch of the imagination. But that art style certainly does propel it forward because it's got a lot of wacky stuff going on, and again, that works really well. But where it really succeeds is the music. It has really, really good music. Just really catchy tunes that will get you going, and they just get stuck in your head incredibly easily. Especially the main theme, which plays at the intro sequence and then during the main menu. So that'll just get caught in your head incredibly easily, and the rest of the tracks when you're actually racing around are very, very nice as well. The sound effects are alright. They work, but that's about it. They don't really capture the full wackiness for the most part. They just do what they need to do, and they could have put in some more zany sound effects here and there. They could have done more with the actual sound effects of the characters, but some of them don't exactly sound like they probably should. It works though, and the sound effects never leave you going, "Ugh, this is terrible," so that's a plus. But obviously what really matter here are the story and the gameplay, except this game doesn't really have a story. A bunch of zoo animals escaped and they're on go-karts and racing around. I don't know what you could make a story out of with that. At any rate, the gameplay is what has to make up for this. So how's the gameplay? Well, it's a pretty standard kart racer for the most part. You drive around on these various tracks as you go through the game, and you go through the various circuits, which are bronze, silver, and gold. You'll find that things get harder as you go further in. For example, when you get to the gold circuit, the tracks are much more complicated than they were in the silver or the bronze circuits. There's also 3 difficulty settings, so that can change how the actual game plays out. But the actual tracks themselves are fairly straightforward. You just go around the track and, as best you can, try to get into first place, and you have a variety of power-ups available. These range from things like oil slicks to things that get in the way of your opponents, or just try to eliminate them altogether, which is harder than it sounds actually, as well as things like fireballs, which are always fun, or things that are actually on the tracks themselves, like speed ups or jumps. So you have to plan those out accordingly. And so the game does benefit from multiple playthroughs, and once you know the layout of the tracks, that makes things a lot easier for you. But there's also the simple weapon that you get, which is launching hedgehogs at things. You'll find a bunch of hedgehogs scattered throughout the tracks, and they're very silly. Some of them are, say, floating on the kind of thing you would find in a pool raft. Some of them are sitting there reading a newspaper. One of them has a shotgun. They're just a wide variety of silly hedgehogs that then you pick up and then you launch at your foes. And you make them spin around for a bit, and then you pass them, and everything is glorious. It's a very silly game. And so you find that the sense of humor is quite nice and refreshing compared to some other games out there. But the racing gets fairly samey fairly quickly. Obviously, it's a racing game, so I mean, it's going to be fairly samey. There is, of course, a two-player mode that you can sort out. You can either do split screen or modem or serial play. And so, with the serial and modem play being basically for the combat mode, where you're basically just trying to eliminate the other player. Meanwhile, if you're playing these two-player racing, that's pretty much going to be split screen. So, it works fairly well for the most part, actually. I have not actually played it via modem or serial, so I don't know how that works. But the combat mode is probably something fairly similar to the Wacky Duck Shoot, where you're driving around as just yourself and you're picking up all the hedgehogs and trying to eliminate all the wacky ducks that are around that particular arena. So it's probably something fairly similar to that, I would imagine. But again, I've never really managed to play it because that's only modem and serial play. But there's a decent amount of variety here, and the game itself is certainly wacky and has a good sense of humor about it. And as far as kart racing games go, it's pretty solid. It's a fun experience. And even though it isn't particularly challenging, it's just something that's good to hop into for a few races here and there. You don't really have to play this thing very seriously. It's just fun for some occasional romps. But that's kind of the nature with any kart game, really. They're more party games than anything else. Now, what I would like to see with something like this is more players than just two. But that's just the nature of the beast. More often than not, you're not going to have more than two players on a DOS game. So, it's understandable why they don't really have that, but it would be nice to see something like that thrown in there, maybe with a mod or something, but a game this old, probably pretty hard to mod that in. At any rate, Wacky Wheels is a pretty fun game. It's worth checking out if this is your kind of thing, or even if it's not really your kind of thing, it's worth at least trying out the shareware version. Because there's some fun to be had here, and it's certainly something that if you are just looking for a casual game, it works pretty well. Thanks for watching.